Doesn't work?
You know, yeah, fix my hair now.
The only thing I had to do today was press play, and I couldn't even get that.
Well, the thing is that apparently, like, you know how the camera puts on 10 pounds? I'm just wondering, like, how many cameras are on me right now? Like, about extra $30. Anyway, so what's out there is a bunch of information of how to do an investor pitch, and this is just one piece of what I found out there, which was on a Forbes, I think it was, Forbes article about how to give a pitch. And this is the kind of information that's out there, which is very frustrating. Have any of you worked with a pitch coach of any kind? How did it go?
Good.
It went good? It was perfect. Wasn't me. What about you? How did it go with you?
It's fine. We work with Donna, but it's like 20 minutes.
20 minutes.
Yeah.
My problem, I work with many, and usually, like, you know, everybody has different opinions, and
Yeah.
if you ask your project to be reviewed by like 3-4 different people, then you come to it and you go, okay, I don't want to do this.
Right. Because that is the experience of a lot of people, in that if you talk to different people about ideas about how to change a presentation, they give you so many opinions that at some point one tells you to do one thing and somebody else tells you to do the exact opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, one somebody tells you, oh, you should emphasize this, and the other one is like, oh, throw this part away.
Right, exactly, and it's challenging. And so, you know, the other piece, we were just talking about this before, is I'm going to give you a couple of questions. So I oftentimes ask the entrepreneur, will you please send me your presentation? And for those people who were not here, because you already know the punchline, what do you think is the most common response to me asking an entrepreneur, will you please send me your presentation? What's that? Which one? Wait, did you hear it? Did you hear the answer? Oh, you cheated. All right, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Cheating's allowed when I'm presenting. It doesn't matter. That's actually the most common response, because most entrepreneurs have a folder on their desktop that has like 40 presentations in it. Okay, so that's point number one. Here's question number two. This is we're gonna get no cheat. I don't think you can cheat on this one because I didn't give you the answer. Here's an interesting one. What is one of the primary thoughts in an investor's mind when they see a presentation? What do you think one of their primary thoughts are? Should I give it?
I think it's not really about the content, but who's presenting and how is it presented.
That's part of it. Like, I want to connect with the person that's presenting it. That's part is true.
Or do I want to connect with this person?
Do I want to connect with that person? And I can tell you, do I want to connect with this person is help when you talk in a way that they understand. I can tell you one of the most common responses, what's that?
Simplicity. Maybe.
Simplicity, definitely, because you know what one of the most common thoughts in a lot of investors' minds is? Particularly, like, does everybody know angel investors? You know, angel groups of angels? Yeah, like individually wealthy people. You go to groups. One of the most common thoughts in their minds is, when am I going to get my money out and at what multiple? They want to know, if they put $100,000 in you, what am I going to get back and when am I going to get back, right? So if you put those two things together so far, which is they have lots of presentations that are trying to answer this question, it's frustrating, I get that. But here's the last part, which is, what is the objective of a presentation? Let's say you're going to present to a group of investors. What do you think the objective is of the presentation? Getting money, that's part, ultimately that is the goal. Yes, that's true. But if you're in a meeting with them, here's what I can tell you. If you're in a meeting with a group of investors or even a venture VC, it doesn't matter. The point of the meeting is to get to the next meeting. So when I talk to entrepreneurs, particularly if you're out, are any of you going to present to angels or angel groups? Yes, one, yep, two. Anybody else? Who else are you presenting to potentially? VCs or individuals, or you don't need to present?
In this format, usually angels.
Got it.
Groups.
Got it.
Or like this random events where you are told that there will be some angels.
Right, got it. So if you're at the random event where you're there, by the way, those random events where you got to present hoping there's an angel, those are frustrating, I get it.
That's 95% of them.
What's that? That's 95% of them, I get it. Yeah, because it's hard to get to a final presentation of angels, because like the band of angels, which I've worked with for since 2003, they get about 50 to 70 companies a month, and 3 make it to present 10 times a year. And I help each one of the companies that come through. So the thing is if point number 1 is you have lots of presentations. Point number 2 is the investor's thinking, when am I gonna get my money out at what multiple? And point number 3 is the point of the meeting is to get to the next meeting. What ends up happening is you start to understand that there is a limited amount of content that you really need to get to. And if I were to give you like the succinct answer of what a presentation should do, this is what I think it should do. It should describe what the problem or opportunity is, and I'll show you in a second here. What your solution is. There's a big problem, opportunity. We've got a unique solution, and we got a team that can do it. And there's a path to monetization. That's it. If you can hit on those 4 things, you have an effective core of your presentation. So, is there any questions before I go to the key points a little more deeper on the presentation? About what I've said so far?
I have one. We are talking about the first presentation, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, talking about the first presentation. The second one, like a due diligence, that's like a different conversation, which I've coached entrepreneurs. The majority, but let me actually restate some things. Like, if there are specific things you want me to talk about, just ask anything you want, because I have almost certainly either have it already in my presentation or can actually address it. Okay. So if there's any question at any point, like I'm cool with this being unstructured because I have slides I want to show you, but this to me, if you were to say what should the slides be in the presentation, this is it. I'm going to go through each one of these: the problem, the solution, the competition, the go-to-market, what your financials are, and what the management team is. And frankly, like that's not really mind-blowing because you will be able to see that in one of those 6 billion results. But let's start with the most challenging piece of the puzzle. So the first thing you got to do is describe the problem statement. So we heard you describe your problem statement, which had some of the elements in it, and I wasn't overwhelmed by this text on the slide. That was very helpful. But the thing is there's a few pieces of what I think are important. So the first one is, because someone's giving a presentation, which is true that you have to assert your credibility in a presentation, the way a lot of entrepreneurs assert credibility is by getting very, very technical, which is fine, that's where you're comfortable. But it doesn't assert your credibility as being a valuable investment necessarily. And then the next questions is to think about what are the audience assumptions, and who do I think I'm presenting to? So you learn about who's in the audience. If you're gonna go in front of a group, you learn about who's in the audience. You remember, they're people too, and so if you have companies that have an emotional tie element, like that's why it's one of the things I liked about your presentation, which was, it was about the journey of a trip that was actually quite compelling. If you have emotional ties in it, you bring it in. And finally, this last part, which is the problem is most often not the problem. What I mean by that is, usually the problem the entrepreneur chooses to describe isn't actually the problem that is the real problem. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm gonna show you some real slides of examples, and we're gonna talk a little bit about, it's good, we can critique them because they're not here, right? So that's not a problem. So this is, anybody have any thoughts on, this was an actual slide. And the Global Scouting Academy wasn't there, was the example, but this thing was. So does anybody have any thoughts on that slide? If you were in the audience as an investor looking at this presentation, what would, yes, go ahead.
There's too much text and a lot of technical numbers, words, big words.
Perfect. There's too much text. Definitely, you guys agree with that? Too much text?
So
Especially
scientific.
on this picture.
What?
It looks so scientific on the picture, guys.
Very scientific. It is a very scientific presentation.
I know that I will not understand, so I'm not even gonna try.
That's what most people ended up doing. It's actually a
And
really,
then I'm not gonna invest.
that is the issue. So let me actually, I'd like to keep this fairly casual too, because I'll share. There are people out there who do some of the things that I do, like do presentation consulting, who tell you, if you work with me, you will get investment. Just run from people like that, because that's actually not a fair statement. The fair statement is, if you work with me, it will be really clear what you do, and your investment proposition will be really clear, which gives you a great opportunity to get investment. And in its simplest form, I can tell you, just in the simplest form, what his solution does is there are certain procedures where something needs to be inserted into very, very delicate veins, where it needs to pivot and come down. And the current technology isn't well designed to do that, and he's got something that helps him do that. But I want to touch on one thing for a second, which is because somebody who mentioned it's really technical. Was that you? Yeah, very technical. So I work with cardiologists. You guys, cardiologists, like heart doctors in the science of. And I'm telling you, God bless their hearts, but for the life of them, they have to say myocardial infarction. You guys know what a myocardial infarction is? Most people don't, okay? It's a fancy way to say heart attack, right? They say myocardial, they can't just say, no one grabs their chest and says, I'm having a myocardial infarction. Everybody grabs their chest and says, I'm having a heart attack. And so the thing that I'm gonna keep emphasizing as we go, and ask questions anytime you guys want, totally cool. The thing I wanna let you know is that the technical stuff, people just get lost in it. And what may seem really obvious to you is not obvious to everyone. So now here's one, so all got it on that one? Okay, here's another one. I'm gonna give you the before and after, and I actually worked with this person.
There is something, we've heard of 20.
There's something, there's $20 billion of it, I don't know what that means, right?
But I can see and read it clearly.
It's difficult to read. Difficult. So you know, I know it doesn't seem like earth-shattering, but that comment about it's difficult to read is an important comment. Make your slides so people can read them, right? You chose weird things. Great guys, his name's Paul. He's great guys. Anyways, and it's like a very it's visual, which I like. I definitely like that it's visual. But he's trying to describe a very difficult concept. But I'll tell you what the concept is. And he just got a ton of funding. So what the concept is he started a company that when you go in to get, what's it called when you get cancer treatment? I can't think of it. Chemo, when you get chemotherapy. What they want to know as soon and as accurately as possible is, has the cancer returned? That's what you want to know. And the earlier and more precise that you are about finding out that the cancer has returned, the quicker you can do something about it. Because the longer it goes, you're in difficult challenge. But there's a twist. The twist is when you go from it's a long way out to we get it really early and accurately, there's tremendous value in that. So this was the before, and this was the after. His name of the company's Combinati. This is the historical technology that dealt with that. So you can see the cancer signals in the blood time after treatment. This is what they've historically done. This is where a lot of venture money has gone into in terms of improving, right? Improving and getting earlier. And he goes way down the thing and gets it far earlier. And the thing is there's huge venture and treatment value in that. That's his proposition. He doesn't need to describe the technology. He doesn't need to describe the science, because the truth is, and they were presenting to a group of investors where they're mixed, where some of them get it and some of them don't, but everybody can understand this, right? So you guys see like how different it is when you go from something that's comparatively complex and something that's comparatively simple. It describes the problem statement really well. And I'm going to show you a couple of other ideas. These are two images that I've used. That's why I like your presentation. It's Adam, right?
Yes.
That's why I like your presentation, because you used imagery. Like this is two before images that really. This one was about it's a company that's focused on helping parents deal with a lot of kids. So you can see that's the picture says. And this was one about how do you go across these server farms and look at what's going on with each one of the, not server farms, solar panel farms, and look at each panel. And you see a person, because that's how they've historically done it. A person walks on. And so the idea is with this is, literally for this one, it was just show an upset parent and show a happy parent. That tells a story. And this one it was actually they're using drones to look over all the the solar panels. But it does it in an image way that you can then tell your story and you're not up reading the slide. I mean, let's be honest, like, well, I'm gonna put one up in a second here. If I read this slide to you, it's not very engaging, am I right? Like, who wants, I remember, you know what? So I went to fancy business school and I failed entrepreneurship. And, but the professor who was well known in entrepreneurship literally would put up slides and just read the text, right? And that, like, has anybody ever been in a class like that?
Yes.
Of course, you're not in a presentation like that because I've got text up there and I'm talking to you guys, right? But isn't that frustrating when you're in a class like that?
Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah, nobody likes it. Because the other challenges, and the challenge is happening right now because some of,
Berkeley, I guess.
what's that?
Not at Berkeley, I guess. Because they are the best.
You know, you have it at Berkeley? So the challenge that's happening right now is like literally happening this moment. The question is, as I get your attention, who's paying attention to me and who's paying attention to the text on the slide? And I know the answer, who was paying attention to the text on the slide and who was paying attention to me, which is fine. This isn't about getting you guys in trouble or anything. But the point is, when you put a slide up with text, they don't know, do they pay attention to me or do they pay attention to the text on the slide? And so what I typically advise an entrepreneur, if you're out there giving a presentation and there is text on your slide, to just take a breath and say, read the information on the slides and look down and count to 5. It's gonna feel like 1,000. But if you count to 5 and then they read the slide, then you can talk to them. That make sense? So that's the background on the problem statement. Anybody have any questions on the problem statement? And I can tell you, like, there was one thing I can tell you. There's gonna be a number of things that I'm gonna show you, which are almost plug and play to say, this is how you should do this. The problem and solution statement, there is no plug and play. It has to be done on an individual basis, and it requires a mindset shift to actually do it successfully. And there's one other thing I want to share with you about it. So if you are practicing your presentation, like I hear people tell me, I've been practicing my presentation for, I don't know, 3 weeks, right? Okay, wait, who have you been giving it to? Oh, my CTO or my chief science officer. It's like, that's not the person to try your presentation out at, right? Because they're one of the few people who understand what you do better than what you do, or as much as what you do. And the truth is, if you have an investor who's early on, oftentimes they know it really well too. So if you want a fresh perspective, choosing somebody who's not as close to the company is worth it. So the thing that we've already touched on, which is really helpful, is thinking about life before and after. And if you think about it in simple, non-technical terms, it'll help. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of things. Here's an example of an actual company that I worked with as well. This was their solution slide.
Solution as the problem.
Yeah, right, solution's the problem. That's good.
Was it like 60?
That's good. That's smart. What?
60-70% of pictures are like this.
I would say that's about right. And it's hard for me to understand. It's like literally hard for me to understand why more entrepreneurs. Well, actually, so it's hard for me to understand why entrepreneurs don't find good qualified help to help them, to at least get a few hours of help to do it. Because if you pay $1,000 and it makes a giant impact on your presentation, it's so worth it. And it's worth it not just with the presentation, but you will find yourself talking to your employees, your customers, your partners, all better. So this is, and the after's pretty good. But basically this is a company that, there still are people out there that do P2P file sharing for music. And this is a company that actually has figured out a way to get the marketing information from that P2P network. And so the before was this, the after was this, which is basically someone downloads it. There's the information of the digital fan base of 6 billion people doing it. They have a dashboard, an API dashboard that they can sell to producers, people who are marketing the music. And so they can go to Taylor Swift, which is one of their clients, and sell her concerts and her goods and all that kind of stuff. But it does it in a really simple pictorial way. You guys notice the difference between those two things? Like, it's just literally night and day. So there is one other example I want to show you, which is I I find that if you have a, like, I think yours had this, if you have a software company that has like a dashboard that either is used by a user or like by a client you're working with or whatever it is, screenshots of dashboards are very, very helpful. Screenshots of dashboards are very, very helpful. So in this case, this is a company that basically is gamifying certain things where you can earn credits for a place like Chipotle. And by playing the actual game, Chipotle can get all kinds of information about their users, where they are, what they're doing, how often they're using it, and they come in and redeem, credits, what have you, with this company. But that's a compelling visual to show what's going on with their company.
I have a question with that. I mean, when I see such a screenshot, I just try to analyze it, try to read all the captions and what is in it.
Yeah.
Now, if you are talking at the same time, I will definitely miss you. And because now I'm focusing on it and trying to understand what does it say to me.
That's the one I put. There's no way that you can read it,
Yeah,
and it looks smart.
yeah.
Like, I don't really explain what is it, but it's just supposed to look smart.
Right, so does anybody else have that experience? Anybody else start looking at it and trying to evaluate it? Yeah, you did too?
Here, yes.
So that's a good point. So here's the thing. First, so it's a relevant point. There's two ways I talked about that. This company's called Playful. There's two ways I told them to talk about this. The first is just the picture of the screen is compelling. Just like, oh, this is a really easy way to see everything. And what the entrepreneur did immediately was, which I don't have in this presentation, I have it in the other presentation, I could actually show you, is the next thing he did, he clicked and everything else darkened out, and then he focused on something like, this is one example. So basically taking away the possibility of other people doing that. Make sense? So it's just,
So the point was to show, I've got metrics, they're up to date.
right,
I use them all the time.
right.
I'm not just making this up for the presentation.
Right, so it's like, wow, like, it's because.
It's
the thing-
there. It's
Yeah,
all-
so it's
This
like.
is how I run my business.
Right, this is how I run my business. So it's like, if somebody has any background in knowing, oh, I have this software solution and I'm Chipotle and I want to see what's going on, it's like, just seeing that it's a compelling UI that's actually up and live. This is up and live and being used. This is real data. That creates that's like, oh, that's interesting from an investor's perspective to see that it's up there going. Exactly like you were talking about too, Jeff, like this is how I run my business. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Want to ask? No? All good? Okay. So I'm going to show you one more before and after. I'm sorry, an example of somebody who linked the problem and the solution. So this is a company that I worked with that basically has a technology that connects cars to the cloud and puts that on people's mobile phones so they know what's going on. And they help dealers, and dealers have inventory of all kinds of different shapes and sizes of cars. They have Hondas, they have Fords, they have, Toyotas, whatever. And so what's happening right now is people come to do things on their lot, and oftentimes they're going to get a car and the car battery's dead, it's not runnable, it hasn't been serviced, whatever it is. And so it's creating a lot of tension in the dealership, and there's a lot more to it, but like that's the core thing. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be great if the inventory could talk to the dealer so that when the car buyer comes around, the process is seamless. And what is the solution is he has a software program that actually talks both to the buyers and the dealers so that there's all information about the car is known, because the car just gives off plenty of information. But you can see, and he does a better job of explaining than I do, but you can see that there's not a lot of stuff on the slide, that if given a minute, he can describe this slide, and if given a minute, he can describe the next slide. But it's done in a way that actually does tell a story that begins to weave into what the investment opportunity is. And so one of the things you did in your presentation, which you know, you talked about how you have your solution out there selling. What was important when he was messaging this presentation was that he was already out in like 4 dealerships and had a line on the biggest dealership group in the country. And so I told him, like, as you're talking about it, you say, and we have deals already with these dealers, these dealerships, what have you. And so if you have proof points in your presentation, you can say them multiple times as you go throughout the presentation, because those are the kind of things that they remember. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so those first 2 parts of the problem and the solution, those are the most challenging. But let me ask a question. When you guys build your presentations, where do you have the most challenges in your presentation? Like where yeah.
For us, we have both a B2B and B2C platform.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just like one simple product.
Mhm.
We had to explain how B2B and B2C works. So it makes it a bit complicated. So we are working on simplifying. That's why I said simplification.
Yeah.
And because that's been a real challenge for us.
So is your solution software?
Yeah.
Got it. So your software has an element of we can help consumers
Yeah. Also company.
and we can help businesses,
Mm-hmm.
but help them in different ways.
Yeah.
But use some of the same core things that your software does really well.
Exactly. I mean, we have like one core technology.
Mm-hmm.
We have solutions for companies and developers. It's a developer platform, so it's both for developers and companies who hire developers. So.
Oh, got it.
Got
it.
So in that case.
So it's
you know,
B2D.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. So but what you're doing is you're solving things for everybody who's involved, which is
Yeah.
developers and
Yeah,
businesses.
it's like now it becomes like a cycle.
Yeah.
But hard to explain.
Well, so
In a
for a
very
company
simple
like
way.
yours,
Mhm.
it's the perfect kind of company to describe. Like, this is the way I always think about it. Because my bet is you started the company because you saw whatever was happening out there was
Yeah.
not working very well.
Yeah.
And so describing why it wasn't working very well is like the perfect, you do that?
Mhm.
Great. And so the challenge is when you get to describing
Solution.
why the solution is
Yeah.
there, here's one of the challenges I do find with that is I wouldn't be surprised if your software does so many cool things, like cool in your mind, or cool in other people's minds too, but it does lots of things. The key is like, which ones do I focus on in the context of describing this is the problem that I solve?
Mhm.
I'm glad you said that, because the point, at least one of the points I wanted to make is my experience with the entrepreneurs that come through that I've talked to over the years, 95% of them struggle with this part.
Yeah.
It's super hard to do. And I will say, once it's solved, it makes a gigantic difference in your presentation.
Exactly.
And it's hard to get feedback that is not in the weeds on that issue from anybody who works at your company or anybody who's invested or is advising the company. The people you can get it from are sort of third-party people who can not say definitely.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to pitch myself. I think what I'm saying is it's challenging to do
I
it
know.
on your own.
I get it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Did anybody else have any particular area they struggle with in their presentation? Yes. What's your name?
Aslan.
Aslam. Okay.
Actually, I'm from Teleporter VR, and we are providing a virtual reality platform for game watching experience.
Game watch. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, what we provide is a kind of, I think it's a huge opportunity instead of a killer problem. So.
Oh, right. Mhm.
Yeah, and actually, we are struggling with the telling people the opportunity and the solution, and the problem and solution side is struggling for us to make people understand well.
Because what you're doing is you're taking an experience that may already be somewhat compelling and making it sort of almost like transforming it into something that is way better. Is that an accurate way to say it?
Similar.
Yeah. So your company helps people view gameplay in a new way?
Yes.
Got it. So they could view the gameplay before, and now they can actually view it in a brand new way.
It's like the difference is similar to you can watch any game on your screen,
Yeah.
or you can go inside the game.
Yes.
It's an opportunity, it's a great opportunity, but it's not so easy to tell it well actually.
Yeah, I hear you. So in other words, you get more like almost immersive experience in the game. So I will say this, and you know, having known your company for 25 seconds now, but what I will say, so I get that that's an issue. Like I do work with, I've met companies that are I just met a company a few months ago that is basically doing like immersive 3D, almost like a museum experience, but it's like literally you're inside the experience. They struggled with it. They struggled with their presentation. What I'll say is that one of the things I suggest to entrepreneurs when it comes to things like that, or some things that are similar to it, is if you can come up with an example of something where the experience has been substantially upgraded and that company became very valuable because of that, that actually can be useful at times. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's a kind of before after.
Yeah, a before after, but a before after of another company that started, because what I hear you saying is yours is in the context of gameplay, right? Got it. So what I'm saying is if you come up with a company that has created immersive experiences in something else, whether it's movie theaters or whatever it is, like you talk about it in that way to say that's the change. Because short of them putting on the gear or whatever it is to actually have the experience, which can be very useful for that, but you can't do it in the context of an actual, it's hard to do an investor presentation. But short of that, what I suggest is companies talk about what other things have been done that were like it. And there's like another way I talk about it, like this is a little bit of a pivot, but like a lot of times, I talked with a company the other day who, the person was a paramedic. He was a paramedic for all his life, and what he did was he dealt with a lot of cardiac issues, and he had a device to help save people's lives essentially, but he'd never started a company before. And what I suggested to him was go find other companies started by entrepreneurs who have never started a company before but have become wildly successful. You know what I mean? So it's like, just because you haven't started a company doesn't mean you can't be successful. Just because you don't have a business background doesn't mean you can't be successful. Find things that are like it and tell the investor about it. That's not exactly what you're talking about, but it's sort of related to it.
Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah, like another example of that is, I'm just sort of firing them out here a little bit. Oftentimes companies are started by people who used to work at big companies and they saw a problem that the big company didn't know how to solve, and so they left the company to solve the problem. And it's not uncommon that that old company becomes one of their first customers. You know what I'm saying? It's like there's tons of examples around that. You know what I'm
We have a similar story. And for Aslan's case, I mean, our product was different when we first started, but we were saying like, consider Gmail, and before Gmail, it was like a very long time ago, people used to like letters.
Yeah.
And right now, instead of writing letters, you just send an email.
Right.
And that we were using that analogy to make it like,
Yeah.
more clear.
Right. Unfortunately, the people who remember life before
Yeah,
email
it's
is becoming
like
increasingly
historical.
small. You know what I'm saying?
It's like a very historical thing, but
Well, I mean, the one that you can use at times is the difference between a smartphone and a flip phone.
Yeah.
That's sort of there, but so I want to. Anybody else want to share? Do you want to share? Yeah, well, yeah. Go ahead.
We have a problem actually, like we have been presenting for 2 years and we never had a chance to present more than 3.5 minutes in front of the audience.
Got it.
So our time is always limited and they shut me off when I'm trying to say something more. So in our case, like she said, like we have B2B sales and B2B sales have totally different business plan and B2C has a totally different. So our presentation always have changes, like it depends who we are presenting for. So it means that we need to make all the time a new presentation, like we need to cut off that part, we need to mention about this part, but if you're presenting someone different, so we need to cut off that part, and we need to elaborate this part more or something like that. So this is a problem for us.
Well, do you when you cut a part off, do you have to cut out like, oh, let's talk about the B2B part this time?
Yeah,
we go see another
it
group, let's
depends
talk
who
about the
we are
B2C
presenting.
part.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, it depends, like, if you are presenting to investor or to company or.
Yeah,
It always depends. So-
yeah. Well, the first thing you mentioned is the 3.5-minute presentation. And my personal experiences, like with all the entrepreneurs I've worked with, when you get the 10-minute presentation down really, really well, I find the 3-minute presentation is actually easier. It's the people who try and start with the 90-second elevator pitch. It's too complicated. It's like too complicated as a starting point. You need to like start with something where you can actually have a discussion where you at least touch on these things in a super simple way. Because the thing I'll tell you, by the way, is once you get this part down, the rest of the stuff's actually pretty easy. Pretty easy. And so in a 3.5 minute, so I get your point on the 3.5 minute pitch. And now this is the second company now that I'm hearing that one of your challenges is we have a solution that's appropriate for businesses. And let's just say a solution that's appropriate for individuals, because in your case it was developers. Are you actually talking about actual consumers or just individuals in your case? Consumers, got it. So that's a little different, but it's still like for an enterprise versus an individual. And at least one of the things that I do ask as a point is to think about this way. If 5 years from now you're super successful, is it because you succeeded with the businesses or because you succeeded with the individuals? That's one way of looking at it. Like, and the answer might be, I have to be successful with both to be successful, which is fine. That's fine. But sometimes that inquiry can help you guide what the presentation can look like. And I do also understand the point that you do have to chop off information at a certain point. But what I do believe is when you get the core story down of this, 2.5 of your 3.5 minutes should never change. Maybe a minute of it changes. But I can tell you, like, if I were to give you some direct advice about a 3.5 minute presentation, if you're giving a 3.5 minute presentation, at least one point that you should make that should take you 15 to 20 seconds is, this is when we think we will get purchased and by who. Give them an idea that your company has an exit possibility. Because, a what?
A lot of, in many presentations, people mention that and it means total bullshit.
That's fine. Might be. It might be total
I've seen
bullshit.
presentations, someone showing logos of 50 different companies and it'd be like, yeah, somebody will probably buy us
Well,
in 3 years.
yeah. Here's so I'll give you some really specific tips about how to actually make that. It may actually be bullshit, but I'll give you some tips on how to make it not sound like it's bullshit. Point number one is, let's see if I can. So point number one is when you are talking about getting acquired, putting 50 companies is bullshit. Putting 5 to 6 companies, that's the first step. Targeted 5 to 6 companies that make sense. Step number 2 is mentioning companies that they have bought in the recent past that do something like you do. That shows that you've actually thought about it. Point number 3 on that particular thing, to avoid the bullshit, if you will, is and this is where the investors start to get very interested, is if you already have some kind of relationship with 1 or 2 of those companies, or if you have an advisor. It's usually an advisor, rarely is it a person on the team. If you have an advisor who has a direct relationship with Google or Facebook or Boston Scientific or SAP or Oracle, whoever it is, like they have a direct relationship with them, that's a way to talk about it in a way that does detect whether it's bullshit or not.
You remember, Shidam, the selection days. After the first speech, they ask us every company on the selection days to include possible exits. After the next set of presentations, they ask us all to remove it.
Are you serious? Why?
We did.
What happened?
Because they were not good at all.
That's not even on.
Yeah.
Well, that's a little different than bullshit, right? That's not good is different, a little bit different than bullshit.
Different way of saying it.
Well, but that experience right there, that should tell you something.
Yeah.